Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll start off with our session 2 of the day, and this is representing our data analytics research team. So delighted to kick off the session today by introducing one of our member companies, Clark Analytics, and specifically Dave Clark, who's the CEO. And Dave is going to talk to us a little bit about data. Does it matter how we use it, and how do we see it changing? So thanks, Dave.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. X marks the spot here. Hopefully I'm being seen, everything okay. Excellent, very good. So thanks, Sarah. Thanks to the PMTC for giving me the opportunity to come up and talk to you about all things data. So the obligatory QR code there, if anybody wants to snap that, and my contact details are there. So as Sarah said, I'm Dave Clark, CEO of Clark Analytics. We're a data analytics and data science consulting, development and training company based in Mallow, County Cork. So the lofty question, does it matter how we use data? When I talk about that, when I start talking to different customers, it's worthwhile understanding what their perspective is. There's some of the things in this presentation I'm going to be talking about that I remember talking about to customers when I worked in EMC over 15 years ago, are going to be similar things that I'm talking about now. So when you're talking about people's perspective and how they use data, you sort of need to understand a little bit about data analytics, data science, big data, that it's a new technology in some ways, and there's a technology adoption curve. And, the 10 years ago, back 2010 and 11, when I was giving briefings in the Executive Briefing Centre in EMC for Europe, Middle East, African clients, I was talking to sort of the innovators and early adopters in terms of their wanting to use data. I showed this graph to a client in a pharma client, and he sort of said, yeah, we're definitely in the skeptics, and in fact maybe there's 30% of us more than 16. So there's a lot about the pharma industry I can understand why. The amount of the regulations, validated systems, no single single copies of data. Can't really throw around data very sort of easily, as the sort of innovators and early adopters might want to do. And in fact, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was talking to pharma clients, they would have said, okay, so if I'm going to invest this X amount in a data analytics project, what exactly am I going to get back for it? And the answer back then would have to be, well, it depends what we find, and that was not really a message that went down very well. But there is, in what is the opportunity? A study came out by McKinsey back in November 2019, where they looked and they talked to, I think it was 1,600 CIOs across lots of different industries, and they were measuring the ones that they saw were leaders within the space, which was, I think, about 5%, about 80 of those. And they defined leaders as companies who had done significant data analytics projects across 5 different organizations or departments within their companies. And you can see from the results there, at least 50% of respondents were getting up to 5% of a revenue increase in that particular department, or up to a 10% expense decrease. So that 15% margin is really your opportunity. And if you multiply that across lots of departments, you can see why in their study they were seeing, the companies who were investing in it were really reaping returns from that. So some of the critical success factors that they noted, and I'm going to note the top 3, and then I'm going to add a couple more that, in my experience of working with clients over the last 10 years, a couple more that I see as being sort of important. So aligning business and executives to data, investing in AI talent and training, enabling enterprise collaboration, and they were from the McKinsey report, the top 3 characteristics of those leaders in the space. And I would add getting end-to-end data accessibility and applying a programmatic risk-based delivery methodology. Now, the first one there, I'm not really going to touch too much on aligning your business and executives to data. The studies are out there, in terms of the returns. So all I'd say is you can bring a horse to water. But what I am going to talk about a little bit is these sort of 3 topics, and the second and third one there is a little bit grouped to a certain extent. So, like investing in AI talent and training. So 10 years ago, when I was presenting to the innovators and the early adopters of the sort of big data techniques, when you put, and in fact, when you put into Google right now the ideal data scientist, you'll get a graph like this. And in terms of, okay, you want to invest in talent and start training your people, training them to be the ideal data scientist and give them all these skills was a little bit difficult. And you try to turn your salespeople into proficient programmers, and you'll have a bit of a challenge on your hands. But what has sort of happened, I think, in the last 10 years, is we started to realize and deconstruct a little bit what these skills were. And in fact, your sales and your finance people do definitely come back in to the need and adding value here. So it's not really an ideal data scientist. In fact, you have to sort of deconstruct these different skills a little bit to understand that, in fact, it sort of takes a team, and there are different sort of areas of specialization in terms of data analytics. It takes that team, and there are business process and technology aspects to addressing and being able to provide that sort of ideal data scientist capability within the organization. Many moons ago, when I started out in my career, I was working in custom system development with consulting houses up in Dublin, and we used to talk about people process technology, business process technology, the need for all of these things to be taken into account when people were providing and implementing custom software. Now, one of the things about that is, technology or process, there could be a challenge with the technology, or maybe the business wasn't quite right, which meant that a custom software project sort of failed. What I'm finding in the data science space and the data space is that you might have the best technology, the right technology, you might have the right business aspect that you're going after and the perfect process, but the software, the data science or data analytics projects may still be seen to be not effective and effectively failing. And that is really because the data may not be right. So you may have everything else working perfectly, but if the data isn't there to answer the question, your project may be overall seen as being not effective or not successful. So collaboration between different people and sort of risk mitigation as well, and expectation management, and all these sort of different skills in the project become very, very important. So collaboration for me is best learned in implementation. So, when you're talking about skills development, you really need to talk about developing the key understandings of understanding the business context. So what question are you going after? Understanding the data and analytics and systems architecture context. Where is the data that you have access to? And what is the quality of that data? And both of those understandings are generally held in 2 parts of the business. The business may be on the OT side of the house, the operational technology, the manufacturing folks will understand the business context. The understanding of the data and architecture systems context may be held in the data teams or IT teams, but you need to bring both of those together. And understanding that is where your project management and people management come to the fore. So one of the things that is another, if you're trying to develop this talent in collaboration and building collaboration within an organization, and it's best learned through implementation. The Lean Sigma approach or Six Sigma approach to training, where you have your yellow belt, green belt, and black belts, We've also developed similar training with the ICBE SkillNet's Business Excellence and Advanced Productivity, which sort of builds on that, so that you learn applying data analytics concepts, through actually, our level 1 is aligns a little bit to the yellow belt training, understanding the concepts of data mining and applying it to a business question. Level 2 then is a little bit like your green belt, and sort of a mentored approach to applying analytics within an organization. So, okay, executives, hopefully they get the message. You start training and implementation, you start testing things out. The next challenge, I think, is getting that end-to-end data accessibility. There's a challenge in highly regulated systems that data tends to be siloed in different areas. The new value and the new thinking, is that you need to take almost like a platform approach, but that platform approach doesn't necessarily mean that you need to copy data out into a platform, but you need to have the approach of getting that end-to-end view of data. There's a concept that came up by folks called the Greylock Partners in the UK, and they termed the new moats. Right, so you heard of data lakes, now there's moats. So the new moats are your defense mechanisms to business model erosion. And so they termed, they had an idea of systems of record, which is sort of your IT systems. Systems of engagement is how you actually read data. And the systems of intelligence sort of fit between both of those, and really was a place where you took all the data from your systems of record and you came up with your defense mechanisms or your new insights that could basically help you form proper business-driven data decisioning. I have added in the OT and the IoT because the systems of record are not just now IT systems, but also OT and IoT systems. And new concepts are coming out now to help you basically build that systems of that platform. And the platform is not a second copy, but is more a central place to access data across all of your systems of record. It may involve creating a data lake or a data warehouse, but not necessarily, because one of the challenges that we're seeing now in the data industry is that there's so much data out there that it's getting difficult to move. So, extracting out data and putting it over into a second place to run all of your queries is becoming a little bit more challenging. And some of the latest and greatest things that are in the data analytics, in the data architecture space, means that separation of storage and CPU compute capabilities means that you don't necessarily need to move data around the place. So some important things that need to be put in place in your data fabric are things like master data, data virtualization, batch data that we know of, and your log-based, time-based data, streaming data, messaging data, APIs into data sources, wrapped around with data privacy and governance. Data fabric is not one system. I can't, give me a data fabric. It's a concept design of many different things. But I think, although the pharma industry has been sort of, the late majority, maybe even the laggards, in terms of the adoption of these new technologies, they're benefiting from the experience of a lot of the different industries out there that have jumped into a lot of this, in that a lot of these newer technologies are in fact of benefit, I think, to the pharma industry, and things like not having to copy data. As I said, second copies of data is a true copy, and all that challenges. So we're down to, so that's getting end-to-end data accessibility is getting a little bit easier. Applying the programmatic risk-based delivery methodology, because of the fact that it can be a failure, I mentioned that earlier, where a lot of people, executives that start out in these data analytics projects, they get disheartened because, we spent a lot of money and we didn't find the answer to that particular question. The fact is, you do need to take a risk-based approach, have an agile process. I came up with that, I wrote that article there a number of years ago where I talked about the 5 rights of business analytics. Get the right question, right process, right team, right tools, right answer. The right answer may be you find that nugget that's going to help you, twist the dial and get your revenue return or your cost decrease. The right answer may also be you don't find the data that allows you to do that. But the thing is you're learning. And that's part of the process of having that risk-based approach. Collaboration, again, merging people from the business into your data analytics team. The analytic project PM, the PM is, that project management skill is a skill that really allows you to enable communication and manage expectations of your actual business vendor. Again, that could be scaled up then. So you can have lots of quick projects, innovation workshops where you work out what are you going to do, apply the risk approach to it. You may test out some pieces of data and some things may go forward. But having that risk programmatic view across the organization, like McKinsey talked about, in 4 or 5 different places, means that you may get value in one place, you may not get value in another, but the value in one place where you are getting your 5 or 10% may enable you to have maybe a couple of failures, sort of that fail fast, fail often, which people in pharma don't necessarily like to think about too much, but that is sort of what needs to be done in the data game. Thank you. Any Q&A?
Thanks, Dave. I'm just going to check and see if we have, because we have quite a number of people online as well, so just leave it open to the room if there's any questions for Dave, or indeed from the audience online. Dave will be part of our panel discussion at the end anyway, so we can wrap things up there. Okay, super. Thank you very much. So that leads us to our next talk for today, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. John Cosgrove, who's leading, again, one of our newer core research projects. And just get your slides for you, John. Feel free to introduce yourself. Great. Leave it to it.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Hello, everybody. Nice to see people face to face, and it's great. We're still getting used to. I met a few people today for the first time that I've been engaging with over about the last 2 years, so it's great. So my name is John Cosgrove. I'm here from the Technological University of the Shannon, the former Limerick Institute of Technology, and I've been working over the last year with the PMTC on establishing this project, which is just now coming to its first start date. Just my background, I'm Director of Smart Manufacturing at TUS. I've been leading collaborative research projects with industry in the area of automation, digitalization, robotics, and data analytics for the bones of 30 years. So we've quite a lot of projects, and this project in particular is a collaboration with Eli Lilly in Kinsale and Cork. Eastway Reliability, an SME who provide data acquisition platforms and have their stand here today if you want to meet Elaine and the team. And Chemtron, a company in Cork, another SME who provide seals and gasket manufacturing. Okay, that worked. So the essence of EPIC is that it's using acoustic emissions or looking at acoustic emissions as a mechanism for improving the reliability of seals in the pharma industry. So mechanical seal failures can be very significant. They're hopefully very rare, but can be catastrophic and can significantly interrupt production and have a significant cost, particularly maintenance, ongoing reliability or replacement costs, preventative maintenance schemes that are replacing seals which are actually perfect and then causing additional problems with run-in time on new seals, which can lead to other problems. So there's a significant cost and risk around the mechanical seal failures. The industry partners did some very nice work here across the sector, not just in their own facility, on the running costs of the maintenance of seals as well as the potential costs of failures. and the savings, depending on whether it's small molecule or large molecule and the number of seals and all the rest of that. But conservatively runs up to the millions annually in the industry, and I guess there's people here who will know that better than I. And this project was also identified as an opportunity to look at how digitalization and digital data acquisition tools and intelligent digital system could be used for a predictive maintenance role in pharma that would have potential applications in other parts. So beyond seals, it could be applicable to other aspects, and is certainly, we know, applicable to other industry sectors like food. So the project is due to start in December next month and running for 15 to 18 months. So why predictive maintenance? I think, as Dave said earlier, the information's already out there. Many industries have adopted preventative maintenance and are now looking at predictive maintenance for lots of benefits. It's reductions in cost, reductions in risk, reduction in planned maintenance, more uptime, more asset availability, and all of that. And this curve is often, this is from a publication on bearings, where you have the catastrophic failure at the end there, the red dot. By the failure, if there's smoke coming off it, it's going to fail very soon. But there are predictors that happen earlier on. So that may be noise from the bearing. It may be vibration that can be sensed well before the failure becomes a catastrophe. And depending on the application, the speed of that time, the amount of time you have to plan to take the asset out of service, to replace the part and to bring it back in, that varies quite a lot in the industry. But the earliest indicators that we can see are when a failure mode starts to initialize, are in the acoustic emissions, so you can hear a slight change in the frequency of noise from the bearing, or in the vibration, you can start to identify variations. And this is where the big data and the analytics techniques can see things that we wouldn't have maybe been as obvious for us to measure in the past. So if we have enough data and if we have enough training data, we can now use advanced analytic techniques to identify these potential failures earlier. And earlier means more time to plan for a planned downtime, a planned maintenance event. So the objectives of the project are to develop and deploy a real-time sensing solution, including acoustic emissions, but will also include vibration and factory control data, to monitor industrial parameters and provide decision support for maintenance and operation functions in a pharma plant. So a key part here is, even while we can do very clever and intelligent things in software and technology, we want to bring that information to a human who assesses that it is viable and valid and it's something that should be acted on. Okay? The second objective is to look at how we can develop an intelligent algorithm trained on actual industrial data sets that's capable of predicting seal failure. So what is the remaining useful life of a seal? And can we fit in a replacement with a planned downtime? And is that safe to do so? Or should you be taking action sooner? And there are many, many seals that are replaced just on preventative maintenance schedules that are absolutely perfect and would have a useful life for a number more years. So it's tried to get that the right decision point on taking action. And this would be a system that has certain autonomous features, so it can identify, it can learn from the particular vessel it's on, the characteristics or parameters of that vessel, its operational norms, what good data looks like, and then can start to see anomalies from that data, but can be applied, to different systems without much teaching or training or lead-in time, so that the system can become intelligent to recognize what's normal noise, what's normal cleaning practice, what's normal operational practice, and what are anomalies that are coming from a potential seal failure. So there's a number of stages, and I'll try and jump quickly through them. So part of it is a cyber-physical system and IoT, and a new approach to getting data from the factory floor that isn't linking in or is independent of the operational data or the recipes, the good manufacturing data that's there. So it's an IoT solution that can be added in that will take that specific information out to the cloud. Data analytics that will run on that based on machine learning or deep learning, and a dashboard and decision point suggesting or prompting action. We'll run this. We're doing an initial stage, which is getting data acquisition. So we need to test a number of different types of vessels and different types of environments and different types of product to build up the learning data, the experimental training set that we need. And then in parallel with that, we will be developing the tools, the algorithms around the maths, the hard maths, to be able to have a valid and explainable approach to what the algorithm is showing you. That does all that autonomous identification of the different operational cycles. And then we aim to pilot that in a number of vessels in Eli Lilly to run that obviously in parallel with their own maintenance systems to identify, from our point of view, an ideal scenario would be a failure that happens while we're monitoring, but I don't think that might be everybody's choice. So it's unlikely to happen, so we have to try and pick from the data that we have. So we think the run-in time of new seals is very important, and hopefully we don't get that failure while we're there. And from that, we will be obviously refining the model and developing the software and the technology and the process behind it. And our outcomes are around achieving some specific target metrics for the company: reduction in seal failures, reduction in costs for seal maintenance, reduced failure rates, and improved repair time. Obviously, we'll disseminate. We would hope that there is commercialization potential out of the project or further collaborative research. And we plan to embed a researcher in Lilly, and thanks to them for hosting. Embedded researcher that will be based in their facility. And obviously there's a transfer of expertise from the RPO to the industry stakeholders. And for sure, events like this will continue our public engagement. So that's it, a lightning talk I was told, so hopefully I'm under time. And I can take questions at the end or now if you wish. I'm getting off light, that's great. Okay, thanks, Sarah.
And just as John is wrapping up there, shout out to Steve Jeffrey, who I believe is online, because you mentioned you had support from the company, and so there was a lot of work done within Lilly on this pain point, but it's a safe place, but also potentially very impactful because it is a challenge when it happens. And that leads me to our next talk. Our very own Senior Research Fellow, Marcus Omani, is going to talk today about Project Foresight. Maybe just a little piece on this. So in our data analytics team, we kicked off with a guide really to try and get everyone talking a common language. And I think this is a really strong continuation of that in terms of how we can really progress on this theme. And with that, hand over to Marcus. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. And let's go to presentation mode here again. So as Sarah said, we're kind of got this project that we're launching and building on the back of our Good Practice Guide to Data Analytics, PMTC. So the project is called Foresight, and I want to tell you a little bit about the context for it, the what we're doing on it as well, and where it kind of sits in this large landscape of data analytics, which we're all hearing lots about. So if we consider for a moment this idea of data analytics, like what does it mean? Where is it at? Okay, so we've got the definition of data analytics, which we surfaced from ISO definitions, put it in our Good Practice Guide. So we're collecting data, we're validating it, we're quantifying it, we're visualizing it, we're making predictions from it. And so we're doing all that with a view to making recommendations for next steps. So the bigger picture is we're using it for decisions and decision making. So if we drop that down then to the manufacturing floor, we're generating data from our equipment sets. Then we're translating that data, that original data, over to an environment where we're typically processing it, aligning it with other data sets, and we're modeling it and visualizing it so that we can make those decisions. At the end of the day, we're making medicines, we're not making movie recommendations. So this whole workflow here needs to be transparent, and we need to be able to trust the data that we're going to use and that we're working up. Another key point here is, we're going to make decisions on the data, and that's actually going to have some feedback effect at some point, and we're going to be generating new data as a result of that decision. So that's a little bit the context for the areas on the workflow that we want to talk about. What is Project Foresight? So it's a framework and risk management method for the provenance of data transformations to support the use of data analytics for decision making across pharma and biopharma manufacturing. So a bit of a mouthful, but we say Foresight to wrap all that together. And there's kind of two critical areas we're focusing on for the project. And that's to take this idea of the provenance of the data seriously. To ask the question, where did the data come from, how did it get there, and why is it there? We want to put some standardized framework around answering that question. So that's the first objective, that we build a standardized framework around this idea of data translation, data provenance, as we work towards decisions. And the second objective is that we attempt to prove out the use of this standardized framework within our partner companies. And I suppose the critical point here again is that we are making medicines, and it's very much a multi-stakeholder activity when we make decisions to manufacture medicines in a certain way. So we're looking at the ability to deploy this framework cross-functionally, so across different departments and functions for making decisions using data. I want to provide a little bit more context to where Project Foresight then sits within the entire kind of landscape, if you like, of this idea of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So you might be familiar with that larger hierarchy. So this graphic that I'm going to talk about here is an adaptation of that. First appeared in our Good Practice Guide to Data Analytics, being refined here and presented here for the purpose of grounding ourselves in Project Foresight. So on the x-axis, you'll see there we're talking about data context, and on the y-axis you can see we're talking about level of understanding. So as we move through the different data contexts in the pharma manufacturing environment, the level of understanding changes. So you can see down the bottom right-hand corner, we're talking about our raw data and data infrastructure. We move up through analytics. As we move through the analytics cycle, we're leading on to new knowledge generation or supporting information around existing knowledge. And then we're into this idea of process understanding further on, and to fully contextualize and fully understand our data, I think we're incorporating into our quality risk management systems. So Project Foresight is focusing around specifically the data analytics within this space. And so that's this idea of translating across your original, where you've originally created your data, you're translating that to an environment where you're processing it and analyzing it and modeling it. So that's this level 1 to level 2 area down here. And the next area that we're focusing on is when we get kind of more complex in terms of the data context, and we move up into this, what we call level 2 to level 3 within for the Foresight framework. I think it's important to say what we're not focusing on within the data analytics context. Data analytics is quite a large space to be involved in. we're not focusing on the data infrastructure itself or data governance, data policies. We're not focusing on knowledge management activities, how you incorporate that new knowledge that you gain from analytics. We're not talking about that, or how you incorporate it into your process understanding. We are going to bump up against data access, this idea of translating the data from your original data source. We're aware of computer systems validation and GAM5 and all these kinds of guidances that are out there already. So we expect to be kind of overlapping there very slightly. But our main focus is, as I mentioned, really on the analytics piece, that processing, that workup, that visualization to enable the decisions to be made. So if we're making decisions as well, I've drawn a dotted line back here where we tie the analytics, or what we would hope would be a useful standardized framework for working data up through to a decision, that we would have something useful here that could be, as we would say, kind of a spoke in the wheel for how we would operate in a quality risk management environment. And the kinds of things then that we're doing at Project Foresight is we've got case studies coming forward from our member partners. We've got benchmarking across within the pharmaceutical sector itself. So stay tuned for a survey coming in January, I believe. And we're going to look at other sectors and what they're doing for looking at their own data provenance structures. We're hoping to have this academic, industry, and regulatory reviews of the framework itself. And speaking again to that kind of cross-functional adoption of data analytics, we've got these interdepartmental workshops where we're proving out the use of the framework within our member companies here within this project. So with that, I'd just like to acknowledge everyone involved in the project. It's quite a large project. There's 5 companies and our collaborative RPO partner, IMR, are in there with us as well. Yeah, so it's been a while getting the paperwork over the line here, but we're finally there. We finally started, and we're moving towards workshops before the end of the year on this project, so we're delighted in that respect. So thanks very much for your attention, and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Yep. Is this an opportunity for Ireland? I can also speak very loudly. I'll speak loudly because maybe that will. Yeah. Do you think this is an opportunity? I think it's equally as loud. Is this an opportunity for Ireland to lead in this space from a perspective of advising, not regulatory standards, but definitely regulatory guidance, and to bring this to the emerging tech group in Washington, to bring it to HEPRA, to the EMA, and other opportunities like that?
Yeah, I would see that as a definite marker of success in this project. If we plan to have interactions with the regulatory body on this, and we'd like to get to a point where the content and some of the stuff we're proposing in this framework does bubble up to European level and further afield there. So I think, yeah, it is certainly an opportunity for us to be leading in this space.
Thanks, Marcus. And Marcus is going to stay on for our panel discussion, I think. So actually, for anybody who has joined either in the room or virtually since the start, I just remind that we have a QR code. So what we've been doing is polling the audience just to get a sense of who we have engaged in this, because we want this to be quite interactive. So we maybe take that first question. And while that's going on with the audience, that's the first question on data analytics. What kind of barriers does your organisation face in the adoption of data analytics? So for our panel discussion, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Anne Green from TU Dublin. Anne has been leading the Pharmaceutical Regulatory Sciences Research Group in Ireland for quite a number of years, and is now head of, I think, continued graduate education. So Anne will chair the session today and we'll be joined by Marcus. I'd like to welcome back Dave Clark. I'd like to welcome Damon Warnock from Alkermes, industry lead on the Foresight project. Dr. John Cosgrove is going to join us as well. And Marion McAfee, one of our collaborators from Atlantic Technical University. And last but not least, Elaine Berkery, one of our SME member companies. So Elaine is involved in the project which John has talked to us about. And sorry, I'll just get the answers up there. I think this is our audience poll here. It's kind of interesting there. And I think, so what kind of barriers does your organisation face in the adoption of data analytics? The employee skill gap, leader skill gap, two distinctly different things, I would say. Lack of business driver or data, lack of cross-functional data dialogue. I think that's one of the things that Foresight is trying to help address. 10% have no barriers. That's great. Hopefully we'll hear from some of those folks today as we get into the discussions. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to our chair for today. Anne, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and welcome to the panel. It's great to meet you all virtual or in person, having had many opportunities to meet virtually over the last couple of years. Thanks very much for the presentations. And we have a big panel here. We have a few themes we're going to explore rather than a series of questions. And we would certainly welcome some interaction with the audience. And I think, Sarah, you might have some people online as well. So as you see fit, just pop in a question. So I think I'm going to start first with what does good look like? And I think, a colleague of mine who's very big into knowledge management always comes out with this with a saying, start small, but start. So if we were to ask, the panel, and I know, Dave, you did speak to some degree about what does success look like, but, maybe could you elaborate a little bit more on that, perhaps with an example? And then maybe the rest of the panel members might just come in with, their advice to somebody who's interested in going on a data analytics journey, is beginning to embark upon it. Where would you start? What would be your first step?
Great question. For me, part of the challenge I think that people who go into data analytics and data science need to get over a little bit is that this idea of the fail fast, fail often, and this experimentation. I think one of the things that is interesting in terms of applying data analytics within a pharma space is just the fact of going in and just starting to apply data analytics, not necessarily to find this nugget, this thing that's going to save your costs, or this nugget that's going to increase your revenue, but just to understand more about how your process is working. So beginning to combine time series data as your bioreactor, you're growing your drugs, or your chromatography or cross filtration. For a lot of the times, people just they have batch data and they may take averages of certain process times or things that are happening over a multi-week period. Now there's technologies out there which you can start applying multivariate data analytics and just to apply it so that you can understand more about it. And in fact, the FDA and the regulators actually really like that if you start doing that. So maybe if you're a bit unsure as to, I'm not sure exactly how if this is going to save us money or make us money, but starting off, it'll help us understand more. I think that's a good place to start for me, a good example.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because a lot of the time you start projects from either a point of view of cost or for compliance in terms of there being a problem. And I suppose the concept of your commercial pharmaceutical manufacturing facility being a centre of research is a bit scary. And I think that's kind of is a great starting point for perhaps why we're here today in terms of being in an academic institution. And maybe that's a thread that we would like to maybe, it's come up a few times, the fail fast, fail often, and the word fail does not exist in the language of a QA or even a general manager of a pharmaceutical facility. But I think maybe that's really where, Marion, maybe would you like to come in and maybe just before you might just give us a little bit of a background to your research and your academic path so that people would be aware of where you're coming from. Yeah. And that whole concept of the value that collaborating with academics brings to the table, really.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. My research area is in process monitoring and control, and particularly around using PAT tools and machine learning and data analytics tools to try and turn that into useful information about understanding a process and predicting the quality of the process. And I work with companies mostly when they're trying to develop a new process or a new product and wanting to use PAT tools to kind of speed up that process development step. So getting very kind of rapid feedback on, is the quality good under these conditions, and trying to decide, what the next step should be in terms of optimizing it. And we look at using kind of an adaptive design of experiments approach. So rather than saying in advance, here's our CCD methodology, and we're going to run these factor levels and maybe have 30 experiments that are predefined at the outset, that you're actually using the results that you get, very rapidly from PAT tools to kind of guide actually what the next conditions should be. And that can actually really, really reduce the number of experiments and get better optimization results. So that can save a lot of time in process development. And again, from a regulatory point of view, these are not models that you're using to assure the quality of a product, so it takes that risk out of it. So, and another project that we're working on at the moment is with a company that's injection molding a drug delivery device. And they're very interested in moving to metal 3D printing of the mold tools, because it can reduce the cycle time a lot and lead to very high precision components. But they have a lot of concern about whether 3D printed tools will actually withstand process. And as you say, that word fail is a very scary word. So that's where kind of the academic partnership comes in. That's something that we can trial in the lab, and similar to John's project, develop sort of an intelligent condition monitoring system around it. And so we can test if it works, how long it might work for, what the life cycle might be before they would make any big decisions about moving to a new tool like that.
Great, thanks. And I think that's kind of the word that's coming up when you're thinking about the academic, opportunity, the sort of safe space, the place to experiment and de-risk perhaps some of the projects or test them first. So just continuing with the academic themes as we're on that theme, I know perhaps John, you and Elaine, maybe you might want to, come in with your experience from the point of view of working with industry and what you think you could contribute. Well, obviously we've seen what you can contribute, but what are the advantages of that sort of relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So from our point of view, we've been problem solving or looking at areas of improvement with our approach to data analytics. So our background would be looking at the parameters that John had up there around predicting and monitoring condition, ultrasound, vibration. So for us, we've been, I suppose, bringing that to the table on the projects we've been involved in, and then using the benefit of the PMTC and the relationship with TUIS to provide the academic support as well around the data analytics. So we've been approaching it with our customer base has always been the pharma industry, and we'd predominantly looked at more asset monitoring. And now we've been looking at supporting more process, and with regard to, in John's project, also bringing in the data analytics piece and our expertise around the monitoring. So it's been a combination between industrial experience and then marrying it with the research expertise and using data analytics to, as I say, more problem solve or look for areas of improvement.
Great, thanks very much. And maybe turning to some of our colleagues here who are actually at the coalface of the industry. Maybe, Damon, do you want to maybe speak a little bit towards your experience working on the Foresight project and how, maybe encouraging other companies to go down this path of engaging with academia?
Okay. With regard to the Foresight project, That's something that we'd started about 2 years ago. Took us a little bit of time to get the legal paperwork in place, but we have now kicked off on some of our initial workshops around it. Basically, the consideration that we were looking at was part of the barrier. I see the points up here with regard to barriers maybe to adoption. I think another key one may be the lack of sort of a recognised approach for this. And when you're considering regulatory industry, where we have many sort of guidances and many sort of expectations put on us with regard to our approaches, the lack of sort of a recognised approach as to how you would go about data analytics is a bit of a barrier. That leaves a lot of people historically to view data analytics sort of as a black box area. There wasn't really a lot, I think Marcus had mentioned, visibility with regard to what goes into it. And that was the approach that we were considering then for the Foresight project, was how to go about improving that to sort of come up with a standardized sort of framework of methodology to describe how the data analytics was applied, and then use our standard sort of FMEA type approaches to look at common risks, risk areas in that. The sort of basic way we're taking to progressing that is when you consider within the regulated industry, a lot of what we have to do is sort of describe the science behind what it is that we're using here to provide a solution, then basically describe the solution and then make sure this risk is appropriately controlled around that. And I think what we're trying to establish within the Foresight project is data analytics from sort of the data science point of view, or the science behind data analytics, is fairly straightforward. You access the data, you transform it, and then you visualize it. So basically, once you can explain that clearly to the industry, then the method, or sorry, to people who are going to use it, and then also to regulators, the method by which you actually provide data analytics solutions is you create what you can call a data flow, sometimes referred to pipeline, but it's a series of sort of coded instruction based on technology that take the data, transform it in an automated way, and provide it to the industry as informative data, which takes away a lot of the challenges that industry has, is that a huge amount of data is manually processed. So I think there's huge advantages there. I think also it's a fairly simple methodology that is fairly straightforward to explain to the various different users and the various different regulators as to the way we've gone around this. Gives us sort of a fairly clear manner in which we can describe the approach we've taken, and then you can take a look at that from the standard FMEA type approaches, from both a technical risk and a regulatory or compliance risk. Once you have that sort of basic method which gives sort of straightforward tasks that are performed, then you can sort of apply relative controls around that to ensure confidence.
Great. I'm curious, actually, John, sticking with this academic theme, being an academic, how did the relationship develop? I mean, not the full detail of it, but did you go out and reach out to your industry colleagues, or the companies saying, I have a solution, do you have a problem? Or did they come the other way around? You know, could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
So I think the industry identified a pain point, a challenge that, you know, and what often happens when they come for outside expertise from an academic research centre or technology centre, is that they've identified a problem which they can't easily fix internally. And you can see from the poll, the lack of skills and the employee skills gap and the leadership skills gap is part of that. So there's expertise available in the RPO. So we always like to work where, firstly, the industry has a pain point, and that drives the need. And then if we can find or propose a solution around that. We talk to industry quite a bit, and I might just pick up on some of the earlier question about where to get started. So it's always good to have your people learn in a safe space. So many large facilities have warehouses, and that's where you can start with digitalization around logistics, or data analytics around your logistics and supply chain. You can start with data analytics around your maintenance operations and even factors like OEE on your equipment utilization. So people can trial and learn in safe areas your energy consumption in your plant, for example, or your services. And this is where you can make a start with digitalization and with data analytics before you kind of take on integrating them into your core operation.
And that's really interesting because it brings us nicely, and you did mention the talent, the skills. It's identified as a key barrier, the sort of skills and the human factors, the people involved, how to get all the human stakeholders involved. And I think that is a theme we'd like to explore a little. I don't know, does anybody want to jump in terms of, developing skills? I like the idea, your concept, not just of the safe space in the warehouse or the safe space, in sustainability or something that probably isn't in a GMP train as such. That not only looks at how you can empower data analytics and use data, it also is an opportunity to develop those skills that and to get people used to it. Does anybody want to jump in here rather than asking somebody specific?
I'll do a shameless plug here. From the university on the other side of town, we do run a master's in digitalization and manufacturing, which is industry based. And we also have a program called Leadership in Digitalization and Manufacturing, which has been very popular with companies, and they're all industry-based activities. But most of the colleges and universities these days do have flexible learning programs or online programs addressing data analytics, AI, machine learning. So a lot of the skills, the courses are there.
Yeah, but is that really those are probably are they too technical or too mathematical or? It's quite scary to consider doing a master's in data analytics. Being somebody who's a chemist.
And if I may, while we're on the shameless plug merry-go-round, I think that's it. One of the challenges that you get I want to learn about data analytics. You either find there's a lot of academic institutions, just by their nature, will have it's a 10-day, 20-day, or 10-week, 20-week, or it's a diploma or something like that, which is fine. But learning every single thing about an algorithm may not be the best way sometimes about going about doing it. Which is why I liked the Sigma approach, which is sort of learning by doing a lot more, and I think, because of the collaboration that's needed in actually learning how to apply it, it's not one discipline. So you have to learn as a team as well, right? So the Sigma approach, which is the same approach that we applied when we built courses for the ICBE Business Excellence and Advanced Productivity Skill Nets, it's you learn 3 days effort over 3 weeks with data, with a business problem, with a tool. And you sort of you learn by doing. And I think that's the important thing. That enables people to learn quicker, faster. It's not that expensive. It's not a major time effort, but you start thinking a little bit like a data analyst and thinking about data a bit more.
Maybe just to pick up on that point and try and answer the first question as well, I think one of the things that came out of the Good Practice Guide was this idea that you should just start, right? You should just do proof of concept. I think that's qualified with a but, but you should try and tie it back into a business function at some point. And the same thing maybe holds for, upskilling in this area in, when you're at the coalface, working on the floor there, you kind of just identify the right people who need to start, working on, opening up the programming environment, practice writing the code. The beauty about, I suppose, data analytics is you can fail many times, right? Because you're often running code and testing models and trying things. So take advantage of the opportunity to fail many times and see it kind of as an exciting journey. I think from the managerial perspective, it's probably a duty to try and tie that activity, if you're going to support it, back into the management business function or delivering for the business, but certainly I think there are advantages to thinking about failure as a path forward.
And just while you have the mic, we all have ones, but while you were speaking, you mentioned in the Foresight project that one of the sort of key things you're trying to achieve is these series of case studies. I know there might be confidentiality around it, but you know, is there a case study or an example of, you know, what is the case you're going to look at that you could share? Because we're talking very much in the abstract at the moment, you know, so, you know, is there a case study you could share?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to remain in the abstract for the moment, but I think it's fair enough to say that maybe the second slide that I presented there earlier, it's following that workflow of you need to translate from your original data source to a new data space where you can work up that data, where you could then model and visualize that data, where it's going to bump up against, okay, now we've got something really insightful here, now we need to make a decision. So they're case studies that you know, touch across those
different types of operation parts of a manufacturing
operation, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody, just on the theme of talent development and skills, does anybody in the audience have anything they would, or is there any questions coming in? Because it's such a, you know, that it's such a taking both the employee and the leaders, and even if you were to, you know, it's such a high sort of pain point, or it's been identified as a big barrier. Has anybody any suggestions, or does anybody like to add anything from the audience?
To ensure that the people who are actually capable of applying data analytics or data science solutions can translate them clearly in a way that the business understands them. Because sometimes you'll find that people who are well versed in either the technical or the data science side are speaking what they are communicating a clear message to the industry, to business users. The business users are probably hearing something completely different, if not thinking they're listening to a completely different language sometimes. So I think communication is very important to try and find that business value and translate it in a way that the business can understand it and then can basically utilize it to an effective way.
And have you an example of an effective means of communicating some particular sort of data solution that you came across, and how did you translate that into something you could communicate to the leaders?
I've been, about 7 years in data analytics now. For the first 4 years, I thought I was doing a great job communicating to my business partners. I realized when they eventually got brave enough to tell me that no, they really weren't understanding a lot of what I was saying, because it's a very complex area. So basically translating it down to some fairly simple anchors, so that sort of principle of data analytics, people started to get it. Oh yeah, data analytics isn't so scary if it's just about accessing data, transforming and visualizing it in simple terminology that they understood. Then with regard to in that sort of concept of a data flow, well, it's only a series. You manually process data, you put into Excel sheets all the time. What we're doing is creating some instruction within a series of code, which is providing you all these nice little graphs at the end of the day. But it's really just doing what you did in Excel in an automated way. Those sort of simple examples seem to translate reasonably well into the business, in my experience.
And I guess that's what your Project Foresight is perhaps trying to achieve. And we eagerly await these case studies and the presentation of them, because it's still a little bit abstract. But does anybody have any more, you know, anybody have anything else they'd like to share around, you know, the communication?
Yeah, well, just on the skills gap, even, you know, I think that graph, it's a huge call to arms, I think, for the universities. We absolutely have to respond to that. And I know John mentioned, you know, master's programs and, you know, lots of options for lifelong learning these days. But we've more recently started to look at the concept of micro-credentials as well. And you know, so rather than having to sign up even to a whole module, you could sign up, you know, we break that up into little parts and people can sort of not have to overcommit maybe at the beginning. I haven't been too much involved in that personally, but maybe, I don't know if any of the industry people would like to comment. Is that a more attractive kind of mode of delivery maybe for some people?
I think on the education front, we're going through a transition at the moment, right, where it's digitalization, and on the education front, where we're needing to upskill the current workforce, but we also need to keep an eye on the younger workforce coming through. And so, programming skills and the ability to confidently work with data is things that I suppose we need to put eventually in our undergraduate programs in a very meaningful way. It's often the case coming out of PhD level stuff that you can kind of do that stuff anyway, or learn it quickly. Our undergraduates, they get proficient in Excel for sure, but I think the next proficiency or the next evolution of that is actually we need our undergraduates with baseline skills in the ability to work with data, whether that's technique, if we're going to talk in non-abstract terms, if you're looking at a melting event, let's say in a distributed curve and a profile, a DSC curve, the software all day, right, in a lab will give you specs around that. But if you're in a manufacturing environment, you might need to take, a multitude of those curves, hundreds of those curves, and actually integrate the area or pick out the maximum peak yourself. And that's a chemistry data set, but that chemists need to be able to handle that, especially at undergraduate level, master level, as we move forward. It's not good enough anymore to say I'm a chemist and I just use the software to do that. I think there's some little kind of skill set that should be key there, I think, for in that space going forward.
Interesting. Being somebody who works with a whole lot of chemists, and so that not thinking about not just those sort of single curves, but the whole, the big data, moving from small experiment into, what would you do if you had big data around this,
Yeah.
I know that, Patrick, did you want to come in? Now, I'm not sure how much time we have, because we haven't mentioned the compliance. We're okay. Okay, so did you want to come in on talent, or did you want to come in on compliance?
Somebody's running to you with a microphone currently. We all hear you, Patrick, but it's the web needs to.
No bother. So this isn't an echo, I'm just saying it again. So essentially on the skills gap, I had the pleasure of being out in Barcelona for the last couple of days, and I just got back last night. And I was with a client over there, and without naming the organisation, he's the company group chairman of a multinational pharmaceutical. And sitting down over dinner, he explained to me that he had trained all of his staff, his direct staff, their staff, so on and so forth, in digital and data. And the problem was now that they all want to work in digital and data, and they don't want to sell the product, they don't want to work in manufacturing. So it's become a different problem. So as I said to him, it's no different to when Steve Jobs said there's going to be a computer in everyone's house, and people laughed. And then over time there was, and people became trained in computers, and it became ingrained and intertwined in their very DNA. So I think the skills gap is something that we need to focus on, and it's going to be unique to everybody's individual journey and culture, their individual digital maturity, where you are in that curve. You may have adaptive AI, feedback loop control, or maybe you just have a Power BI dashboard for information purposes. But I do think the universities, UL, I'm a Cork man, so UCC and MTU, I have to plug them as well, are beginning to solve it. Industry is beginning to solve it. So I think that this is going to be resolved fluidly to a point as well. And this happens at every transformational change. This isn't new. This is just part of innovation and transformation. And consulting firms, because I'll plug myself, are always there to help you. It's the only sell I'll do today. But I think it's going to be a fluid journey. Maybe more so on the regulatory piece than a question. So a lot of my clients that have maybe reached the end of their maturity curve as they see it today, I'm just explaining it to them that it's more the first mountain before they see Everest behind it. But they're starting to look at feedback loop control, because they've gotten to a point that they have real-time multivariate analytics, as Dave pointed out, that they have predictive maintenance that John mentioned, they've done the data governance that Damon mentioned, and the other capabilities. So now they're looking at that next step around GXP, self-controlled processes. And I suppose from a talent perspective, it also helps repurpose some of those individuals on the shop floor maybe to work on some of those digital capabilities as well. The difficulty they're finding though, and it's a long question, the difficulty they're finding is the regulatory bodies. So they're asking me, well, we can't do this because we haven't received regulatory guidance. So then when I travel to Washington to the FDA's Emerging Technology Group, they're telling me, well, industry hasn't come to us and given us guidance. So there's a back and forth at the moment. And, you know, and I know, Anne, we joked before saying, Houston, we have a problem, because both are pointing the fingers each way and not talking. So what's the panel's perspective on that? Do we need regulatory guidance? And if so, how are we going to achieve it?
Well, I think you know my perspective on it, and I might just give it. And I think I've had dialogue with Sarah about this. Like, the current regulatory situation is that the regulators give guidance. The industry wants that guidance. They follow it to a T, and then they have a law, and then they have guidance, and the industry looks at the regulator and says, what should we do? And the regulator looks at the industry and says, well, what do you think you should do? But that's not a very useful environment, because the regulator has power and it's not a level playing field. And that's really where I think who's missing in that room is the academics. And that's, you know, it brings it back to the kind of original conversation we had here. But I'd like to maybe see what the views of the panels are now that I've given mine.
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that. I suppose in brief is probably what we're looking to do at Foresight. We're not saying we're going to solve everything here, but I think if we can make inroads collectively with industry and academics and regulators together, looking at, okay, this is the actual landscape, these are the actual concerns, this is how we would actually propose to address it, then maybe we get further down this road, and there's no more pointing fingers, or we get that communication going.
Yeah, I think exactly right. I think it has to be education on both sides, and possibly the both sides need an external partner, be that academics, be that consulting houses, be that people who can sort of, you know, work with the companies, understanding the process, understanding how data analytics can be used, and bring both together to sort of say, well, here's the best practice. You could use this possibly, and maybe the external organisation can be the whipping person for the FDA, but you couldn't do this. But rather than the companies themselves having to be, oh, we couldn't say that to the regulator, there has to be a sort of neutral party that wants to help both parties come together.
Yeah, a facilitator, and then that has
We'll
always
do it.
been.
We'll do it.
Yeah, well, no, because it is when you do look at guidance and you look at, you know, ISP guidance or you look at PDA guidance. I mean, there's rarely an academic. There might be, but rarely. But my experience on those, you know, document preparation is they prepare it, but once the regulator comes in with an opinion, that's what goes into the guidance. Yeah. You know. And that's the sort of, so we're still stuck in that, and it's not necessarily developing, you know, good practices or best practices. And I think that is something that we should do. You know, that collectively, you know, we should be collaborating more so. Do you have, John? I know that, you know, you mentioned ICHQ10, and you know.
Yeah. It's not an area I have deep expertise in, but we worked with companies around FDA regulatory environments as well, where a similar approach, actually, it's safer to have an academic organization sort of break things and present things rather than a particular industry champion saying, we've put our hand up and we're using this approach in case the auditor decides to pick on them. You know, so yeah. I like your suggestion that there is a role for you know, academic partners to perhaps try to push the boat out on what's possible, whether it's in data analytics or training, and then try and push that to the regulator. Yeah.
It's this sort of hidden power imbalance that's there, and it's much better now than it was. This concept of compliance versus quality is moving, but you know, to have that neutral dialogue that's in a safe space is really something that can happen in the academic sphere.
You mentioned, you and I have talked about this, and I think in Ireland in particular, we're really lucky to have a regulatory authority, HPRA, who are very engaged through this process. Firstly, with our guide, we've engaged with them. You know, they've been quite open to say that they're learning. There's a little bit of chicken and egg. I think you alluded to that already. And I think, you know, the opportunity for us in PMTC is to act as that conduit. And if it's not already written down, that represents an opportunity to influence. And so instead of somebody coming with something that's preconceived, if we're working at this early stage with industry, you know, that's an opportunity. It's a challenge in the here and now. But equally, it's an opportunity that if we can, you know, demonstrate through Foresight the framework, we can bring and use our platforms as a way to engage and show case studies. Here's what the industry thinks is good. That de-risks for industry, and I suppose that's one of the ways we'd like to facilitate, because I think that's really win-win, and they've indicated they're open to that. You know, and so in a way, you've talked about the ICH guidances, so ICH Q9 as an example in terms of development for drugs will give opportunities. There's lots of indicators around the willingness and actually the ask in some ways from the regulator for the industry to use more data. It's the how, and having the confidence to speak to that, and that shouldn't reside within one function of subject matter experts. There's risk with that. I think Damon's comment kind of hints to that. So really what we want to get is everyone in the organisation is in step and everybody is really confident. They know what they're doing, why they're doing it. And I think that's really powerful. But there's a little bit of the ball is in the court of the industry to some extent to try and, you know, demonstrate what it believes is useful and appropriate for the industry. So I think that's the sweet spot that we're in. There's a lot to do. I think, Marcus, you've already said it. We're not going to solve everything, but making a start and putting a framework in that's based on existing and well understood principles like ICH Q9, which I believe you've indicated is just updated.
Signed off yesterday.
So,
I got a word from a note from South Korea to say it has finally been approved. All parties have signed up to it.
It's like white smoke. So I think it's using those existing frameworks, and so that's we've started on that in Project Foresight by leveraging quality risk management, but it's a long journey. But I think as long as we're taking it together and we're keeping engaged with the regulator, I think that's the right approach.
And don't lose sight of ICH Q12 as well. Embedded in that is continuous improvement, and you being able to make changes if you can demonstrate through your PQS that you are actually effectively making, and how you make continuous improvement is actually using the data, is feeding into that continuous improvement and supporting the evidence for why you should be doing it. So have we any questions from any more questions from the floor?
I don't know if we have any online. Is there any questions in the room? Any observations even? There's been a lot of discussion and really great discussion. So we have a big panel here, but it probably represents the breadth of this topic in many ways. And there's different ways that we're tackling it within PMTC. Padraig, a question here at the front.
It's not so much a question, maybe it's an observation. Something you picked up on is looking at the slide around the leaders and leader skills and employee skills. I think, and it's kind of come up, but there is a fundamental point here around development of leadership. And the chap who spoke earlier about his dinner in Barcelona, I think was very telling that you were talking to the CEO, and he obviously gets it, and he bought into the concept, and he has rolled it out across his team. But the skills requirement of that leadership group are different to the technical applied skills needed by the teams to roll it out. But if those guys, if the leaders don't understand what's happening and they don't see the linkage between some very detailed technical, I suppose, projects that are being proposed and the business benefits and how it translates into business performance reporting and how it can make them look good in terms of feeding up the line, then they're not going to budget the resources, throw the resources at it. And so, you know, those two percentages are interesting. I think to me, very fundamentally is making sure that there is a messaging to the leadership group, and it may even require a separate type of academic input in terms of exploring and sharing how digitalization, how data, gathering of the right data and analysing it and processing it and bringing it back and showing where that links into things like profitability, but also in terms of the other obligations around compliance and cost, etc., will convince those guys, and then they'll put the money into it, and then everything will flow from that. So I think it's probably worth just making that point here that the messaging to the board, to the senior team is quite different, has different needs, and there is a gap in that space as well.
There's another opportunity for the universities, I would suggest, in terms of, tailored training and maybe also other avenues like consultancy houses.
Maybe just one comment on that, Sarah. Sorry, and myself and Anna touched on this sometimes as well. If we take a step back for a minute and ask, what's people's perception of the value of data analytics on the ground? So that might shape the leadership question and the direction as well. So you have to understand a certain level of detail, maybe, to understand what value can be delivered, and maybe that's the cutoff point between those practitioners and leaders in the space. But I'm curious to maybe it's a question to the audience or people is like, what's the perception of value within your own organizations or within the companies you interact with? Of do they actually see the value here, or is there also still a gap to be bridged there?
It might be something for the next, Patrick's going to come in, it might be something for the next the good data analytics guide. Yeah. Patrick?
Absolutely. Seeing I have the mic, I said I had to take advantage, so apologies.
You should be sitting up here.
So I think just on that point, Marcus, the business questions being answered are different at every organisation. Some are looking from an advanced manufacturing perspective, others are looking just to increase productivity and yield. Others need a dashboard to tell them their crystallization process isn't accurate, or that it's a large molecule bioreactor that's failing, or whatever it may be, or predictive maintenance. But I think sometimes that there is a gap between what the technical are delivering on the analytics front and what the business expect. And that isn't necessarily a technology gap, that's maybe a knowledge transfer gap. And I think it was Padraig was speaking there about about that difference between deploying and what a leader needs. It's equally so very different as to how you communicate and transfer knowledge to a technical individual and what business question they're answering to what the business actually expects. And I know Damon and myself were even talking about that earlier around that whole cultural piece. So in the organisations I interact with, the business questions can be quite vast and different, but the reason when they're not delivered is typically common, in which that technical and business relationship hasn't been married correctly. And that's where there's a tremendous opportunity in a lot of organisations, per se, a low-hanging fruit.
It strikes me that, sorry, Elaine, that when you think about it, and you started with as people, process and technology, the process and technology seem okay, it's the people. If we can crack the people nut, and maybe that's, that might be the focus really of where we need to go. I mean, I think the compliance is probably not as big a problem as we thought it might be, because I think the guidances of Q9, Q12 allow you, it's just we have to show them why, demonstrate the effectiveness of it. It's that whole back to that people thing. Elaine, sorry.
Actually, from the panel today, my biggest observation is actually, rather than us focusing on having our big experts, it's data analytics training across an organisation tailored to your role within that organisation. Deeper dive for technical perhaps, but actually across all functions. And that's my biggest takeaway. And I think it's worth noting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, no, and I think those two skill nets that I mentioned were to look. 3 days effort over 3 weeks, learn everything by doing, all that sort of good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting one, the McKinsey study. They talk about all the different roles, and there's lots of different roles. One role that they saw as being critical was what they called the analytics translator.
Yeah, the communication
so
again.
This is back to the community, is translating, what is the data saying to what is the business asking? And it's that translator role between the business and the data team, the wider data team, is the critical point, because that, if you get that role right, and often then the role is filled up by consultants like myself and like Patrick and different people that come in that help by doing and making sure that every project has got some analytics translator role, so that you can translate back to and you're teaching the executives as you go. And unfortunately, this is a maturing process that we're going through. Everything is going to become more data driven. There's no way around that. If you're not data driven, then you won't be as efficient. Your competitors will eat your business model. You just have to become that way. And the only way really of doing it, because it is such a multi-organization within the organization, be it business process, different people, is by getting started and making sure you're communicating and over-communicating, which is why I really like that the project management, that skill, really look at those people and skilling those people up, because their role is all about communicating to the sponsors, communicating to the team, having a well-oiled project management sort of skill set within your data analytics function will, save you a lot and really accelerate, I think, the organizational learning.
Yeah, it seems there might be something to think about there from a P&T perspective around the people, the communication.
Yeah,
and it's not
absolutely.
just about developing training programs, but just, they're part of it.
Absolutely, and I think, look, it's probably, we'll wrap it up, I think, because we want to go to lunch. But on that point, I guess I mentioned at the outset when I presented the overview and the welcome address that we're looking towards the future. We're hopeful that we'll be refunded, and really want to make sure that we shape that and get that right. And I suppose one of the things that we've identified is, it's back to that safe space, that if we can provide a kind of sandbox environment, that's what we'd like to do, and to have people have a lot more opportunity to explore. We see that as one of the barriers. But I think that piece around, everybody working together, and I liked your analogy with the Sigma Day, because I think as an industry, and most of my career has been spent in the industry, and every organisation went through continuous improvement, and that was really rolled out across the organisation by people learning together and doing. And when you summed it up, Elaine, it resonated with me again there, that it's not about one function, it's about everybody learning together. So I think there's lots of different ways companies will need to tap in to bridge this skills gap. So there's probably going to need to be a shopping list. I think the task for us in PMTC is to see where exactly we'll be best placed to add value within that, and leveraging on our infrastructure and our skills set that we have. So we'll likely do a deep dive in another workshop on this. I think we haven't solved it. There's a few nuts that are yet to crack, but it's been a really stimulating discussion. I'd like to say thank you to you and to all the panellists. Really excellent panel discussion, and to all of our speakers in this session. And with that, release you for lunch and ask, would you please be back for two? So we have some excellent exhibits as well on this second floor. If you'd like to make your way to the ground floor, that's where we're serving lunch. So thank you so much.